we are really working a bit, it seems like, in our own universe, trying to figure out how we are set up. But actually, this is not something that is only concerning us. It's an exercise of scrutiny, and one that I think really goes to the heart of the work of the European Parliament. And where we can very well see how Parliament is using its democratically elected or democratically received strengths to ensure that the Commission, that is in charge, of course, of proposing laws, but also enforcing them. So this is why it's so important that we explain this process, because it's one of the most, let's say, basic democratic one that we can imagine. In many member states of the European Union, not to say in all of them, this never happens. National ministers never have to go through a hearing. You know, you can criticize the way that the hearings are organized here because they may be not as going as deep as you wish them to go. But imagine in many members or in most member states, you don't even do that at all. The ministers are just appointed by the president upon proposition from the chancellor or the prime minister. So this is something we should really value and use this opportunity to also have a closer look at who are these people that will have an impact for the next 5 years on us, and to talk about that in our networks and in our audiences, because of course in the end the members of the European Parliament will take a decision on who will be able to join the Commission and become part of the College of Commissioners, and who not. And you know, never say no. Never, like, there's always a first. Let's put it this way: there's always a first time for things. But typically, so far, since the Parliament is doing these hearings, we've always found 1 or 2 or 3 commissioner designates not to be up to the task. So it's not just something we do on paper, but it's actually something that has a very real effect on the Commission. So this is something that I would like to invite you, that we continue this process of showcasing to our networks and audiences what is happening in this in these democratic processes of budgetary control, of scrutiny of legislation, and to continue this process of working together. Now, with that in mind, I'll let you go back to the topic that you were actually going to work on. And since I think now we've more or less started to solve the problem of logistics, I thank you very much for your attention and wish you a wonderful and especially interesting morning.
Thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor to Noura Rad, who is a former co-president of the European Network of Migrant Women. She's also a lawyer from Lebanon who lives in France. She has opened her cabinet a few years ago. Now she's supporting especially foreign migrant women coming to France. And she was also part of the FULFIL project that we will tell you more about today, a EU-wide project that we conducted for 2 years. She was part of the Ethics and Quality Committee, so she supported all the work we conducted for these 2 years. So the floor is yours, Nora.
Alisa. Yeah, thank you, Alisa. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for the network for organizing this event. So Alisa already represents me, so what I would like to do is to represent a little bit the network for one who doesn't know a lot about our network, about the European Network of Migrant Women. The Network of Migrant Women was formalized as an international non-profit association in 2012 in Brussels. Today, in fact, in 2024, we bring 50 organization members from 23 European countries. Our members, and so we have our members, individual, association, organization, individual members, and we have a big team. A little team, but they do a lot of work in Brussels. They are, in fact, the reason of the existence of this network. Our members come from different countries and represent a unique cultural richness in the global struggle of women for economic, political, social, and physical freedom. The main mission of our network is to make the voices of migrant women heard, to highlight the specificities of journeys of these migrant women, difficulties and obstacles preventing them from moving forward due to their condition, first as women, but also as migrant women. The goal is to make visible migrant women who do not only act as recipients of aid, but also as decision makers and leaders. And that's why we had a few months ago also in the parliament a project, an event, an agency project, and it was about young migrant women in political participation. We work on different axes in the network. We fight against all forms of sexist and sexual violence against migrant girls and women, including prostitution, pornography, FGM, forced marriage, etc. And we promote the civil rights and political participation of migrant women. But it's very important that to do this, in fact, we in the network, we go from the fact that we have a feminist analysis and perspective of different experience of migrant girls and women. We go from this feminist perspective to see the obstacles preventing them from moving forward and effectively fighting against sexist and sexual discrimination and violence. So it's necessary to go from concrete cases and analyze and understand the reason that further prevent migrant women from accessing to justice, to fundamental rights, to healthcare, housing, documents, all this. And in fact, from these analyses, this is from where our project comes in the network and are built between our members and also partners to highlight these issues and also to try to propose recommendations and actions. And this is the essence of the FULFIL project that we are here today, that our members and partners will present. A project that is co-financed by the European Union and coordinated by the European Network of Migrant Women, and in partnership with Olympe Association, Artemis law firm in France, also the Parolan law firm and Iroko Association in Italy, the Association Against Femicide in Portugal, and the European Association of Women Lawyers. So without mentioning, in fact, the content of this project, the cases, the database that is based on, and what in fact is the content of this project, because I think that, of course, my colleagues will do that today. I would like just, in fact, to highlight the importance of such study, because we cannot ignore that still in 2024, women are still subjected to discrimination, to violence, and more migrant girls and women. They are the first confronted with sexist and sexual violence, whether in their countries of origin, but also during the migratory journey and once they arrive in Europe, right? They still face increased risk and persistent obstacle that hinder them from full enjoyment of their rights, despite the existence today in Europe at European level and national level of directives or laws that should protect women and migrant women. I can give a lot of, in fact, example and cases from my own work as a lawyer, and from what we see also from our work in association and organization. I will not go into all the cases. I just want to give some example to highlight the importance of our project, our FULFIL project. We have different cases of women who flee their countries in war and who arrive and are subjected in trafficking and prostitution in exchange of minimum of rights, like basic rights, such as access to shelters or food, when these are fundamental rights for everyone. And women are, and if in fact today women are not recognized as victims of this, as victims of this exploitation, of this system of trafficking and system of exploitation, they will never have access to these rights, and therefore will always be victims of sexual exploitation. And we saw this with women who flee from Syria when we had the civil war. Women, also Ukrainian women. Yesterday we were talking about it with Anna, the coordinator of the network. I saw an article yesterday saying that 1 woman in 2 in Germany, Ukrainian women, they are exploited in prostitution in Germany. So I will let this like this. Women who arrive and apply for asylum, for example, also alone or with their families in European countries, they are not considered as a priority, okay, by the legal, but also by the social system. Why? Because in the social system, when they come with their families, they consider that the man is the priority, because the man is the one who will go and work. And so we will do all the integration program and the employment program for the man, who will give the bread to the family, and the woman is there just left alone with her family. But also, like, for example, I heard a lot of times from social assistant and from legal expert that she has babies, you know. Okay, she came for asylum, but she has babies. She cannot go out. She cannot learn the language. She cannot talk about her story. She has babies. She has to take care. The man is doing this. She will do a few years later. But also in the legal system, we see this. Why? Because when they go and they ask for asylum, most of the time judges don't ask women, what do you have, why you cannot go back to your country. They are there looking to the man, what happened to you, why you are afraid to go back to your country. And when they take the asylum, they take the asylum because the man took the asylum. And if they are separated from the man, we will take back the refugee status, right? So also this is something that we have to highlight and work on. But also we have women who are victims of violence, like these women who come to European countries and to the asylum and seek for asylum. When they are victims, we hear a lot of again, like the social and legal system telling them, don't say it, don't say it. Even lawyers sometimes don't say it, because if you say it, we will remove your asylum, because they will remove it to your husband. So they will remove your status and you'll find yourself homeless in street. And so they flee countries in war. They are subjected to violence in their countries, but also subjected to other violence in Europe countries. We also, in fact, see this limited and discriminatory access to fundamental rights in cases of undocumented women, especially women who wish to regularize their situation. I'm talking like, especially it's everywhere in Europe. We have like directive to how we apply to have documents after a few years. But here I'm talking especially in France. These women, in fact, after like being 10 years or more in France, and when they apply, they still are invisible. Why? Because when they want to apply, we exist that they need proof that they've been here from 5 years, 7 or 10 years. We also need contracts and the proof that they were paid. But you know, women who are undocumented, they arrived without any document, shelter, or without any home, anything. They are invisible, right? And when even they want to be visible, to get into the system, they cannot be, because we have this directive that don't take into account the specificities, in fact, of these women, and they stay invisible in the system. Also, we can talk about women who arrive to Europe with their parents or their husbands, and they found themselves prisoners of the system, because like administratively, legally, they are directly, in fact, linked to their husband or families. And even if we have laws in Europe that protect women from violence, but we see it when we accompany women. In fact, often they don't know the language, they don't have information, they don't know their rights. Even when they try to go to the police, police doesn't want to hear them, and they say we cannot take the complaint. And so in fact they go to the emergency, to doctors. They don't even want to make certificates, because they know if they will make it, it means she will in fact be separated from the husband, and she will ask for another document as a victim of violence. And even if we have laws today, but the interpretation, not only we have a lack in laws in legislative system, but also we have this lack in interpretation and application of legislative systems. And so often, and we saw it in the COVID, these women victims of violence, they found themselves in the street, because they are subjected of they are subjected of violence in their home, but also they found themselves in streets undocumented. In the COVID, in fact, we had the police like arresting them everywhere because they were undocumented, not respecting the hours of going out, no place in shelters, and so totally invisible. So these women, in fact, they find themselves in front of administration that will withdraw their visa or their permit resistance, the residence permit, sorry, because they've been separated from their husband or families without taking into account the violence that they have been subjected to. We have same difficulties also, and we see it like as lawyers with women who have French kids, for example, like they have European citizenship, and who the father is categorically refusing to recognize, to take care of this child. And in fact, when we take these cases to the court, we face judges like they are making accountable these women, you know, not for, in fact, not taking into account that they are alone, they have this child, but no, they are making them accountable. Why you come to Europe and you bring a child? Why? So, and they are victims, and in fact, they don't treat them as victims, but as perpetrators of an offense. And this all why? Because we have all this migration policy and policy, but also misogynist and patriarchal policy that we keep these women invisible. We can bring up a lot of more cases of women. I'm also thinking about, we have this also many times, that women who lose their children, their child, in fact. Why? Because they are also undocumented without a job, and the judge, again, they are not victim for the judges, but they consider them like you are undocumented in a shelter, you are victim of violence, you don't have a job, you don't have money. So no, they will take the child and give it to the father who is violent, right, who is working, so even doesn't have the time to take care of this child, but at least he has a home and he has a work. So this, in fact, few cases of what migrant women are suffering from, not only in their countries, but also once they arrive in Europe. And on this, I can really tell you to see, we have, in fact, in the network published a study, a report on migrant women and access to fundamental rights for migrant girls and women. And it clearly presents, in fact, we choose like 5 European countries, and we present the obstacles in the legal system, not only in laws, but also how laws are interpreted and applied today in Europe, in European countries. And in addition, so the FULFIL project is based on this, on data from practical case law in the EU on fundamental rights of migrant women. This database represents an important step to analyze, in fact, and to document also the violation of rights and laws. This database also allows, based on a feminist analysis, to help judicial system, legal professional, and law enforcement to better protect migrant women. And that's why I think it's really essential to keep having and talking about girls and women, about sex-based rights, because if today we erase women, we will not have access to this database, and we will not, in fact, have any analysis of what's happening with women, you know, girls and women. So it's important to keep it there in our laws, but also in our policies and directives. This is why a feminist perspective also must be at the heart of the work on the fight for equality. Issues related to the legal and judicial treatment of migrant women must be at the heart of Europe in order to move forward toward real access to fundamental rights. The importance of the FULFIL project, to finish, the importance of the FULFIL project, led by the members and the partners of the European Network of Migrant Women, as well as we had, in fact, various meetings, but also trainings led by members of the network at national level. It was to raise awareness on how legal professionals and practitioners can use the EU Charter on fundamental rights to advance equality, non-discrimination, and access to justice. The EU Charter on fundamental rights is an essential legal instrument. We have to use it, and we have the Article 23 that say clearly that equality between women and men must be ensured in all areas. And the FULFIL project and report aims to provide a comprehensive overview of women's rights and fundamental rights in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, in particular with regard of experience and cases of migrant girls and women. This is a huge work that have been done. So I advise you all to use the fundamental, in fact, the EU Charter, but also this report in your activity every day, but also to make awareness about how we can use this charter for a better interpretation, application of laws for, in fact, the profit of migrant women, to guarantee a real access to justice, to health, and to fundamental rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora. And just to clarify, we distributed to you one report that is not the one Nora was referring to. It's dedicated to undocumented migrant women access to rights in the EU. It's a legal mapping of the situation in 9 European countries that we conducted in partnership with Reuters. It was kind of the origin of the idea of the project that we're presenting today. The actual report that brings a women's rights perspective on the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, you have some copies distributed on the tables, also next to the coffee, and it is available on ENOM's website, so migrantwomennetwork.org. So you can find it now in English, and it will be soon translated in Spanish and French as well. Without further ado, I will call the next speakers to take their space around the table. So Ezohe Agatiz, Adama Sira-Leblé, and Clara Bergstein. Sorry, no, Carolina, sorry. Carolina Bergstein. And so Ezohe will take the floor first. Ezohe is representing one of the partners of the FULFIL project, Iroko. She's a lawyer. She's also the founder and director of the organization. She's a doctor, and she has plenty of expertise that she will share with us. Carolina and Adama are representing Olymp Association, and I will say a few words about them later. Go ahead, Ezohe.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Oh, evening, sorry. Good morning, and thank you all for coming. I'm really pleased to see that lots of people showed up for today, and it's really important to have you. I have a can we use that, or I should use mine for the presentation? It's all right. It's all right. I have it here. So I'm going to give an overview. Yes. Okay, thank you. An overview of common fundamental rights violations of migrant women and legal support mechanisms available for redress in Italy, because that is the country, the EU country where we work, and some of the challenges that women face there. My colleague speaking earlier has mentioned in general about some of the challenges that women face. So the question of 2 levels, as women and as migrants. I think globally, it's still difficult, even for women ourselves, to accept that we are humans, to recognize that women are human beings. It may seem strange, but if you look around you, if you think of what happens to women every day, you realize that we are not really being treated as human beings. Sometimes we are treated as if we are less than even dogs. I'm sorry to use that kind of language, but that is a reality that women face. The question of women coming into Europe within the context of family reunion, where their presence in the EU is linked to their husband's control, because under his rights, that she's brought in, and so she's deprived of that primary access to rights, and whatever she has is through her husband's control. The question of healthcare, women's special needs, and that's why we continue to speak about sex-based rights. It's extremely important that we recognize that women are women and need to be addressed as such, and their special rights need to be taken into consideration. The risk of homelessness that women face, because access to jobs, access to those rights, again, is not so right. The question of violence and sexual assault, over 70% of women in prostitution in the EU and of women who are victims of sex trafficking are migrant women. So the risk of trafficking, of course, the difficulty they have in accessing justice, and of course, the little knowledge and use of EU Charter of Fundamental Human Rights. This project, the importance of this project is the fact that it has brought to the front line this charter, which is extremely important. And I'm going to go through a very quick outline of some of the most important elements of the charter. And of course, the question of lack of financial support, including the context, sorry, that's a mistake, in the context of legal action. Now, the key articles of the EU Charter, the question of human dignity, all human beings, it cannot be conditional. The question of the right to life, no one can be killed without, even by the state or by anybody, without due process. Even then, in the context of due process, it doesn't really make sense. The right to personal integrity. And when we talk of personal integrity, we are talking of women's rights not to be violated. But every day in prostitution, in pornography, we see the continuous violation of women. And in everyday life, I mean, if you look at some kinds of publicity, they are selling an object, and then you have beside that object a beautiful car, you have the body of a beautiful woman also on sale. What's the message you're giving to young people? What's the message you're giving to those who are going to buy it, especially men, because they are the ones who buy women's bodies in the majority of cases. Prohibition of torture. Again, we're talking of prostitution also, and pornography, because some of the practices in prostitution and pornography respond to the international definition of torture. And yet, in all jurisdictions, practices such as pornography is accepted as normal. In many jurisdictions, practices such as prostitution is accepted as normal. Prohibition of slavery and forced labor, that's in Article 5. The right to liberty and security. Article 21, the right to non-discrimination. So the question of any discrimination based on sex, race, color, ethnic or social origin, genetic characteristics, language, religion or belief, political or other opinion, membership of a national minority, property, birth, disability, age or sexual orientation is prohibited. And I will underline based on sex here. Within the scope of application of the treaty establishing the European Community and the Treaty of the EU, and without prejudice to the special provisions of those treaties, any discrimination on grounds of nationality shall be prohibited. Though we have this question, this article, very often, notwithstanding this provision, we see cases of discrimination based on nationality. Then Article 23, my colleague already mentioned that equality between women and men. Even within the EU, quite apart from the question of being a migrant woman, the question of equality between men and women is still a marriage. We are still a long way from achieving that, notwithstanding all of the effort that's been made to reach there. And then health protection, the question of health protection. And again, I'll refer to the special needs of women and the need to ensure that the kind of health facilities that they have is appropriate to their sex. Fundamental rights of the EU correlate with various international treaties. So when you talk about the CEDAW, and you talk about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, etc., Italy and other EU countries have already used this charter to some level, but it's still very much unknown within the EU and not still used as it should be. During our project, the training programs we did, we discovered that quite a lot of people, including lawyers, are not really familiar with the charter. The question of strategic litigation, where you use an article of the law and you take a kind of group case to court to enforce and ensure the recognition of a special right, is not being used within EU countries. I think there are very, very few countries. These are examples of the High Court in Genoa and also in France. I'll leave that for my colleague later who will speak about that. Coming to the question of legal support mechanisms for migrant women in Italy, I must say, when governments also do something that is worth commending, that is worth mentioning, it's good to speak about it. And we have the now famous Article 18. In Italy, we have two famous Article 18s, one that has to do with employment rights and this other one on social protection for persons at risk of exploitation under the Italian immigration law of 1998, which was the first law in all of Europe, actually, and it still remains the strongest law on the protection of migrant women who are victims of trafficking within the EU. Is still the strongest, that now allowed special protection for them, and so they can have access to a residence permit, and then when they find jobs, they now have access to the kind of laws that also protect other women within Italy. Unfortunately, due to changes in government and new policies that are being brought in, this article is under attack, even in Italy, and we hope that things don't change drastically. Then you have the general legal instruments to which Italy is a signatory, like CEDAW and other international conventions to which the country has signed and ratified and thus transposed into national laws. The need for more and better use of strategic litigation to protect and enforce migrant women's rights. Now, these are some of the difficulties that migrant women face in accessing the law: systemic difficulties, question of stereotypes, lack of access to an interpreter, the need for support, which they don't receive due to the complexity of the procedures for residence permits, lack of appropriate information, and then individual difficulties, precarious economic situation, the fear of losing residence permit due to those reasons I spoke about before, and the fear of impact of filing a complaint if they are victims of violence and are dependent on their husband, so they will not file any complaint. In conclusion, I want to state that there are three things. One, the importance of understanding the specific needs of migrant women in order to use existing legal instruments to defend their rights. The laws are there. They need to be used appropriately. The importance of making adequate resource provisions to understand that such rights are protected. As my colleague also stated earlier, you can't expect a woman without money to be able to take care of her children. So even the basic rights of ensuring that they have jobs need to be enforced. The importance of inclusion of migrant women at the table where policies and laws are made which impact them. Their lived experiences are indispensable. You cannot take decisions on my rights when you don't know what my needs are. That is something that's extremely important. And so I think with that, I have nothing else to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I will now give the floor to Adama Sira-Leblé, who is founder and director of Olympe Association in France. She also supports migrant women who come to France, and especially asylum seekers who are seeking to be protected. They are seeking international protection, and of course, their journey are really complicated. So thank you, Adama, for your work, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alisa. Thank you, Enom. Thank you all. I'm happy to be here, and I will present you how the difficulties in France, how the migrant women have a difficulties to access to the justice. In the charter, they don't have. The EU charter ensure to in their Article 47 the effective access to the justice for anyone. It means everyone is entitled to a fair and public hearing within a reasonable time, and to get a guarantee to go to the court too. Migrant women face multiple violence. It was said here by my colleague, often like to their marital status, the fact they are isolated and have like little knowledge or French. They are also victims of discrimination, racism, and sexism on institutional level. In France today, migrant women who are victims of violence are not sufficiently protected or even listened or let alone believed. For example, when you are a victim of violence, it is your right to complain, to make complaint. However, this right is not always respected for migrant women who often refuse to make complaint when they decide to do. It was mentioned by my colleague too. These refusals are accompanied by sexism and racism, present prejudices and stereotypes. Because they are foreigners, those women who suffer violence are not considered to be a victim. People often think that what they want to do this procedure, like they are lying to get paper when they want to give to go to complain for a violence. They are used to be raped too. It's a consent suit. They are used when they are victim or exploitation or even that. As they wanted to come in Europe, there is the price to have to pay to work or to be housed. There is the fact. Not so far, 2 days ago, we have this fact with a migrant woman. When we call the police, there is 3 months. She can't do the process to complain. When we call the police, the police says, okay, if we don't accept to take her complaint because they don't have a necessary needs, there are not proof, or there is not a level to the police to prove something. Their work is to take the complaint and to leave a judge to see and evidence how do you to give a judgment. For women who have obtained a residency permit following their marriage, is ordered to renew if they will have to justify the violence they have suffered and prove that the break of their relationship was due to the domestic violence. It's a very difficult this situation, maintain a lot of migrant women in this position and they suffer a violence. For the women who are victim or sexual exploitation or trafficking, the only way for them to remain in the country to be cooperate with the police. It's very dangerous sometimes for them to cooperate it, because if they leave or to say what happened, the trafficker can take another member of their family, or they can kill someone too. For the victim, another victims like forced marriage, the authorities will have to be say and repeat again their stories. They don't believe them if they say their stories. The authority will be forced to leave if they don't cooperate too. These prejudices are not an obstacle to access to justice and possible compensation for them harm they have suffered. Because if you don't have access, you can't complain. You don't access to the justice. It is not only things like a police level. The problem is also access to justice is also a rise to the context of certain procedures or laws that discriminate against migrant women. It is from the government, from the law. Like we have a good law to protect the violence against women, like ordonnance de protection. Really, it's a good instrument to protect the women who are victims of, sorry, who are victims of violence. Because in this process, the family judge can take very quickly, within 10 days, a lot of measure to protect the women who are victims, like to give a house, to take a measure enabling the violence posed to remove, the material house to be allocated to the victim, measure to be taken concerning parental authorities, and also if you get this ordonnance de protection, you can obtain a regularization, it is a permit, séjour. Some migrant women are expressly excluded in this protection in the French law, like the Algerian woman. They can't apply for this. The law exclude them because the right to apply on this woman, it's from what I say, between France, it's a bilateral agreement between France and Algeria. This law, it's that in 1968. For this, you have in this law, you have exclusive women who come in France. They are victim of violence against. They are a victim of violence. They can't benefit too if you are like a tourist or you are temporary residents. You can benefit this protection too. We have another fact. It's to other major challenges in accessing justice, in particular the lack of means to pay for lawyers, but also the need for lawyers to be aware to the specific need of migrant women so that they can provide them with better support during proceeding. For example, apart from a few specific cases, until May 2024, in a few months, access to legal aid for foreign nationals is possible only if you are a legal resident. As a result, many migrant women are not, can't be accessed to the justice because they don't have a money to pay a private lawyer. And lack of information and access to her rights, migrant women are often unaware of the right to protect them, which makes them vulnerable and exposed to multiple forms of violence. Why? That's why this project is so important to inform them about their rights and how to use them effectively. I will know. Now I will leave the floor to Mrs. Carolina to tell us her story as a migrant woman who benefit from a training as part of the FULFIL project in France. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Carolina. I'm from Brazil and I'm a migrant woman living in France. So since I arrived there, I faced many challenges regarding administration and bureaucratic procedures. They were not only exhausting, but they also caused a lot of anxiety and fear. And the uncertainty of not knowing if you'll have your papers approved and thus your stay in the country allowed can be quite heavy. So when I took part in the FULFIL training delivered by Association Olympe for migrant women in France, I found myself surrounded by similar stories. We migrant women experience the weight of having our lives, our plans, and our futures in the hands of public officers who do not fully or even remotely understand what we face and what we risk by having, for instance, our papers rejected or even delayed. At the same time, during the training, despite feeling we had a lot in common, I was also aware of our differences. Many migrant women face even greater challenges because of their color, because of the country they came from, because of linguistic barriers and lack of resources. So I was particularly touched by the story of a colleague, which I would like to share with you. She's a young migrant woman coming from Mali, living in France without papers, so she couldn't be here today. And that's why I want to amplify her voice. It's not to give her voice because she does have a voice, but unfortunately, she couldn't be here. So after we had discussed about the right to health in Article 35, as it was presented here before, on the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, and also the right to the integrity of the person in Article number 3 of the Charter, she decided to share her experience with the rest of the group. So when going to a gynecologist in France, she found out she had a health issue in her uterine tubes. The gynecologist said she will refer her to a surgeon for further consultation. She followed the gynecologist's orders and presented herself to the surgeon with the papers she had been given. She went through a medical procedure and was sent home, having been told that her problems were solved. Here, maybe a parenthesis is in France, even without papers, you can benefit from healthcare. Yes. She went through a medical procedure and was sent home, having been told that her problem was solved. It was not until some time after that she found out that the procedure she was submitted to was actually the removal of her entire uterus and not only her tubes. When she went back to the gynecologist to understand what had happened, the doctor simply told her she had nothing to complain about because she had signed the papers authorizing the procedure. She was devastated, as you can imagine. Her right to her body's integrity was violated. Her consent to the surgery was far from being free and informed, of course. She hadn't understood what she was signing to. She barely spoke French. And there was also the weight of following doctors' orders. After all, doctors are perceived as authorities. Even for us here in these rooms, if a doctor say, you have this, do that, I think most of us will follow. So, moreover, her right to found a family, which is in Article 9 of the Charter, was also violated, as she would not have the choice to conceive naturally anymore. As a migrant woman without papers and little money, she had a hard time finding a lawyer to represent her in a case against these doctors. She eventually found a lawyer, not at all specialized in migrant rights, and nor to say migrant women rights. And now, 2 years later, there are still no outcomes to her process. Nevertheless, despite these horrific situations she faced, it was powerful to see how during the FULFIL training, she was able to put into words, and better yet, in terms of violations of her rights, what she had suffered, what she had been through. The training allowed her to gain the vocabulary to express what she had been through and to reassure her that she was doing the right thing by going to justice about this case and persevering with the process, which we know it's not easy, it's not fast, and it can be quite overwhelming. So by hearing her testimony, I realized that indeed being informed about our rights, our fundamental rights, despite any status, is indeed the very first step to pursue justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carolina, and thank you also for sharing the testimony of the participants in the FULFIL training. This is one of many testimonies that we have collected through these training sessions. We conducted trainings all across Europe with 500 legal professionals, more than 130 CSO professionals, and migrant women. And of course, going through this training, we have stories of violence and extreme fundamental rights violations coming up. And this is also why we feel that there is a need to have these spaces also to address this. So I'm now going to give the floor to Anna Zobnina, who is Strategy and Executive Director of the European Network of Migrant Women. And she will present to you one of the deliverables from the project, which is the first EU database dedicated only to case law related to fundamental rights violation. The floor is yours, Anna.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to see this room full. I will be honest with you, we kept accepting registrations because in our experience, when you organize anything in Brussels, if you have 100 people, that means 50 people will come. Because, and we have meetings of heads of states today, so I'm very grateful for everybody who is here. Thank you very much for your interest in this subject. For us, this whole project, it's our baby our baby that we gave birth to and nurtured, and we wanted to grow and we wanted to succeed. And the database is one kind of, it's part of the project. Okay, it's an EU project. Every project has its beginning and its end, we know this. And for us, this is much more than a project. For us, this is the way to finally have a depository of legal information pertaining to fundamental rights of migrant women. And when we say migrant, we do not use the European Commission official definition, so it's not just third country nationals. In the database, we have cases of those women who, like myself, I am migrant originally, but I'm a European citizen now. So statistically, I'm not a migrant anymore. But also we have women who migrated from within the European Union. And again, they will be EU mobile citizens. But in our books, when we have women from Romania or from, usually it is Eastern European or more poorer country migrating to other parts of Europe, they're migrant women, of course, for us. So the database that we created, and we gave it a kind of a name that is easy to remember, I hope. It's Women's Rights Database.eu. So we invite everyone to remember it, to go online. You can do it right now, you can do it later. It is a pretty straightforward website. We are very open to suggestions and feedback if you want to try to start using it and browsing it. The website itself contains several elements. Firstly, it's the database itself, and I will say a couple of words in more details about it. But then we have also migrant women's fundamental rights in the EU on top in the menu. And there, if we click there, just to show the menu, we don't need to go, just to open it. Yeah, like this. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So I will not open every document there, but some of the results of this project that we're speaking already covered, like the report on fundamental women's rights perspective on the EU Charter, it can be found there. The training that was delivered, that Alisa mentioned the number, there were 475 legal practitioners that were trained in 3 countries, and also the EU training. The outline of the training is also on this website. There are additional resources. We created fact sheets on specific articles of the Charter with little bit of case law, with little bit of examples and explanations. And all of this is in relation to migrant women. And I really cannot emphasize enough our approach as a network, and on this project as well. We start from a feminist perspective because there are big differences. We can start, okay, what do we think about migrants? Of course, we have here an intersection, clearly. It's 2 grounds. It can be more than 2 grounds. But the starting point and the framework for us, it is women's rights. This is where we come from. And this informs our understanding, our analysis, and the cases that we wanted to collect. And let me tell you just a few words. I have to be shorter because we got a little bit delayed. We looked at different jurisdictions. This is far from being comprehensive, full database that includes all the cases. Right now, the database has 90 cases. So you can search by country, you can search by jurisdiction, and there are very specific jurisdictions. So, you know, this instance of court in Germany, Supreme Court, we go up to Council of Europe, so European Court of Human Rights. There is EU Court of Justice, and there are national courts and some tribunals that will be maybe regional within the countries. Not all countries are covered yet, but we have more than 10 countries at the moment. It's a live instrument. There is also an option of submitting the case. So if you come to the website and you, Alisa, maybe you can show. If you go in the resources, women's, submit a case. Yeah, right. So basically, it's a form. It takes you to a form where it's done for legal professionals in mind, obviously, but also understanding that some maybe civil society organizations, migrant women themselves, they might know some cases that we are not aware of. So we're inviting everyone to send us the cases. We will have to clean the data. We have the program for it. We will be doing it maybe once a month. So the database will be continuously updated. This is our hope, and we hope to expand it. And perhaps in the future, we can go to international level to include, for example, treaty bodies, some cases maybe that CEDAW committee was dealing with, or Committee for Racial Discrimination, and so on. We can go back to the website. We do not go into in-depth analysis of the cases themselves. So this is a depository, and we try to be neutral. We give you the cases. We might not agree with all of the outcomes. There are most of the cases that we have, they are positive from our perspective. They are important decisions that legal experts can use, that we hope judges will be aware of. But there are less positive cases as well, which set important precedents. And, you know, we know that jurisprudence also live and things change, and sometimes court take contradictory decisions, and then it evolves. So we're hoping to capture this. And of course, we hope that to some extent it will be useful for actual lawyers who go in court and who litigate and who win. But there are also legal experts who are not in courts, but who may be providing legal advice, and jurists, and they're supporting migrant women. And we very much hope that migrant women themselves will be able to use the database, because it is our very strong belief that law and legal information should not be a mystical something that is only understood by very clever men in suits in Oxford University. But it is really, if we as women don't understand laws, we cannot understand our rights, and we cannot understand even when we're discriminated. So it is in English only at this point. We hope to continue with the next stage. So not only to grow the database, but maybe embed interpretation functions, different translations. And on the last point where I will finish, when we were collecting the cases, and it was an extensive process, so you can imagine, I don't know, probably there are researchers in the room and somebody who's doing work on policy, you know, you do the desk research, you ask questions through questionnaires, so we send out the surveys, legal practitioners who participated in the program, they submitted some cases, we did our homework, and some conclusions that we arrived. Indeed, we absolutely need this database. Why do we need it, first of all? Because imagine we are the half of the world as women. I'm not even speaking about migrant women right now, as women. And we go to Curia, the European Court of Justice database. Do you have there sex disaggregated information where you can say, give me all the information on the cases of women? No, it doesn't exist. You cannot. You have to do manual search to find the cases. And when it comes to migrant women, you have to do double job and go through cases and cases and cases. This is the EU level. But then we have national level. And in some countries, what happens? The databases are not public. To whom they're open? Oh, they open to lawyers. But lawyers also have to pay for it because they publish compendium of cases on a yearly basis. And so, and every country has their own rules. And sometimes even lawyers cannot access to the cases because it's a very complex. Sometimes they have to submit the freedom of information request to get the cases. It's very, very complicated. And if we don't have this this is a picture. It's like a map that we did. We now see clearly. And one conclusion that we reached, women do not have access to justice. Because when I looked at the cases of migrants, who is getting, let's say, European Court of Human Rights or EU Court of Justice, majority of cases is the cases of men. So we have this disparity at different levels. It's very pronounced when it comes really to the high instances of court. And then, as we already know, for example, in asylum, there are applications that they're very often unsuccessful for women in the first with the first application, but women will on appeal then. But that means she has to go through appeal process, and if she finds a good lawyer. Yes, so again, thank you very much. It's women's rights database.eu. Everybody is welcome to use it. And we're gonna have a break and a coffee. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, I saw a question.
Thank you very much. I have one question. Are you accepting the cases from organization, official organization, or also from individual people, maybe from the refugees activists also, or not?
We do not ask the question who you are when you're submitting the case, because what we care is the case itself. So the cases really can come from anyone. They can be submitted by individuals. There is an option in the form to also give us information to get back to you. But we understand that maybe a woman wants to submit a case. She wants to do it anonymous. She doesn't want to, to speak to us after this. So if you want to give us an information who you are and you act as an organization or as an individual activist, you're very welcome, like to disclose yourself. You can do it anonymously as well. And yes, anybody can submit the case. What is important that it is a case. I mean, obviously, if it is sensitive material that we will need to verify, it will not go directly that you submit it and it becomes published. So it will go through verification, cleaning of data, also actually verifying, that sometimes there is a link, sometimes there is no link. So there will be a process of verification and then it will be published. Yeah. Any other questions? Everybody's so impressed with our database. No? Can I ask you, are you mostly, can you raise hands if you have anything to do with legal sphere, I don't know, practitioners, lawyers, or it's mostly civil society organized? Very shyly. Excellent. So we have some, and this means what? It's like I'm on the way to being a lawyer, right? Yes, I'm about to pass my bar. Okay, well, I mean, another thing that I think is extremely important to mention, we need feminist lawyers. We need women lawyers and we need feminist lawyers. Yes. Yes. And it's true. We had Noura, who is our former president, and she is a lawyer. And the reason I can never get in touch with Noura is because she's a lawyer and she's until 12 o'clock in the courts and she's always with her cases. But I know that, and I keep saying, we have to, it's actually, some of the ideas, it is not because we read some books. It is because we speak every day. We speak about very concrete situations and we thought, okay, we need to do something about it. We need to systematize, we need to publish these cases. And then, they always tell us, where is your evidence? Well, here is my evidence, how it works for women.
Sorry for my English, but I think we need woman lawyer. It's very important. And we need woman politic. Yes, feminist, real feminist politics.
Well, I was very worried that I was not enough time, but in the end we did very well. So I'm very proud. We're going to have a coffee. I think that it's being served. I should warn you, it's not a very big space over there. So we somehow probably will need to queue. and just don't feel claustrophobic, or because it's really not enough space, I think, because we're so successful, we're full room.
Now we are going to start a new panel. This morning you heard about civil society organizations and legal experts, women who are on the ground every day supporting migrant women in their quest for justice and their need for protection of their fundamental rights. So we heard some of the very concrete cases that they go through, and also thanks to the testimony of Carolina Bergstein, we heard about some of the concrete violations of fundamental rights that migrants go through in the EU. So now we're going to a next step, and we are going to have a panel with institutional stakeholders that we have invited and that have accepted our invitation. So we will have the EU Ombudsman, who is going to take the floor first, and I will give her the floor very soon. Then we will have two representatives from the European Parliament, so Linia Galvez Munoz, who is the chair of the FAM committee, as well as Emma Rafovic, who is a newly elected MEP, also member of the FAM committee, which is of course really important in our context because it's dealing with women's rights issues. Also, she is suppléante. She is a substitute. Thank you so much. She is substitute in the LIBE committee, which is dealing with fundamental liberties issues. For us as an organization, as the European Network of Migrant Women, it is always important to make the connection between women's rights issues and fundamental rights and liberties and access to justice, both in the European Parliament and with the European Commission. And we have also the chance to have a representative from DG Justice of the European Commission, and she's head of the unit of fundamental rights. So she will, of course, have a lot of expertise to share on this specific issue. And finally, we will have with us online a representative from UNODC, which is the UN agency that is dealing with drugs and crimes, and they also work with databases as a very important tool to fight organized crime and to protect vulnerable groups. So we will hear also about that and how the database we created can be articulated with their work. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the EU Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, or Ombudswoman. We have this, we're trying to feminize the name of the profession. Thank you so much for being with us. You can use the table, you can sit, feel free to, yeah, of course. Just make yourself comfortable. No problem at all. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to help to discuss something that is incredibly important. She tries to get elegantly onto the chair. Okay, I'm here now. And I think I know you didn't plan it particularly in relation to this date, but there's a big conversation about migration taking place today in the Council among the member states. So this is a particularly apposite topic. I just want to make one comment before I begin, and that is I see in front of me virtually all women. And I ask, well, where are the men? Because this is a conversation that has to be had. I know there are a few of you. I see you, I see you, I see you. But this is a conversation that has to bring in everybody. And especially since still so many of our political leaders and lawmakers are men, that is so important. And I've been reflecting on this. I've spoken quite a bit in recent years about the situation of violence against women generally, and particularly violence and abuse of women in the home by their intimate partners or people known to them. And a lot has been done, I have to say, particularly in Ireland at the moment, where we have a female justice minister, and she's done a lot in relation to helping women and changing the law and all of that. And but whenever these issues are being discussed, it's largely women. We need the men. And you know what we need the men to do? We need the men to explain other men to us. Because I'm really serious about that, because, you know, we all have our different sensibilities and understandings. We all inhabit this world in a different way. And I would really like more men to be involved in talking about and explaining, insofar as they can, why so many men continue to abuse and murder women. I think that's really important. But anyway, at the same time, it's great to see so many women here today. So thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. So the protection of the rights of migrant women confronts us with multiple forms of discrimination, including sexism, racism, and xenophobia, discriminations that build upon and reinforce one another. Women globally continue to face unique and frequently lethal challenges and risks. In recent years, we have witnessed the reversal of certain freedoms through the curtailment of reproductive rights, including in many US states, following the decision of an avowedly right-wing Supreme Court to remove a federal right to abortion. In other countries, the rollback of women's rights has created an even more dystopian landscape. The return of the Taliban to power in Afghanistan has removed women effectively from public life and even from certain private spheres. Women are banned from higher education, cannot travel alone, must fully cover their faces in front of strangers, and cannot visit public parks. At a recent UN event, the American actor Meryl Streep said, "Today in Kabul, a female cat has more freedom than a woman. A cat may go and sit on her front step and feel the sun on her face. She may chase a squirrel in the park. A squirrel has more rights than a girl in Afghanistan today because the public parks have been closed to women and girls by the Taliban." Yet even in countries with relatively strong protections for women's rights, we face a disproportionate risk of violence. The World Health Organization states that around 20% of women in Europe between the ages of 15 and 49 have suffered physical or sexual violence from an intimate partner. UN figures show that nearly 50,000 women and girls worldwide are killed by intimate partners or other family members every single year. In the context of migration, gender-based threats are compounded and amplified by multiple other factors: racial and ethnic discrimination, political repression, extortion, and human trafficking. This is true not just in migrant hostile countries, but also in places where those fleeing war and violence are generally welcomed. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, many Europeans opened their homes and their hearts to refugees. Yet women could not always feel safe nonetheless. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees had to warn the United Kingdom against placing female refugees with lone male hosts, citing increasing reports of Ukrainian women feeling at risk from their sponsors. Council of Europe experts and human rights organizations warned of the threats to these women of sexual violence, exploitation, and again, human trafficking. As European Ombudsman, I have dealt with cases related to the difficulties facing women migrants and have advised the EU institutions on how to protect their rights. I investigated how the European Commission monitors respect for fundamental rights in EU-funded migration management facilities in Greece. The Commission has a duty to ensure these facilities provide humane and dignified living standards for asylum seekers, in line with the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, as well as specific EU rules on reception standards. Civil society organisations warn of a high risk for sexual and gender-based violence in some reception centres, noting containers in which migrants stayed with no locks and a lack of safe shelters or designated hygiene areas for survivors of sexual violence or those at risk of it. I suggested that the Commission carry out a fundamental rights impact assessment and identify measures to mitigate potential risks. The Commission agreed to work with local authorities to draw up such an assessment, make it public, and review it periodically. I also looked into how the EU's Border and Coast Guard agency, Frontex, ensures respect for human rights during forced returns. I asked Frontex to establish a plan for families with pregnant women or with children to board aircraft separately and to be seated separately. I also asked the agency to ensure that those escorting returnees undergo human rights training focused on women, children, and persons with disabilities. Frontex, of course, cannot assess the merits of any particular return decision, but I said that their representatives should not tolerate a situation in which, for example, a member state is trying to return a woman in advanced pregnancy. It is also important to look at the broader picture of EU migration policy and how it treats those fleeing war, persecution, or poverty. And I have observed two particularly worrying trends that seem to reinforce one another. The first is a very definite change in political sensitivities towards migrants. Consider, for example, the rather muted response to last year's sinking of the overcrowded fishing boat, the Adriana, off the coast of Greece. Over 600 people, including women and children, drowned when the boat capsized in disputed circumstances. And despite the fact that the Italian and Greek coast guards, Frontex, civil society organizations, and private vessels were witnesses at various times to this tragedy. They drowned in plain sight of the European Union. And yet to this day, there has been no comprehensive investigation at EU level into the contested actions of the Greek authorities, and therefore no accountability for the loss of so many lives, although the Greek Ombudsman is examining that. I looked at the role of Frontex in this incident. Current EU rules make the agency reliant on the actions of member states when it comes to saving lives at sea. In other words, it can't act independently. So outside of issuing a Mayday call, which Frontex chose not to do, the agency had to seek permission from the Greek authorities to act in the case of the Adriana. I found that Frontex had made 4 separate offers of assistance to the Greek authorities, all of which were ignored. I made suggestions for improvement to Frontex, but also called upon the Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament to establish an independent inquiry to assess the reasons for the large numbers of deaths in the Mediterranean Sea. I suspect that this is unlikely to happen in the current political climate. The second trend concerns the EU's externalization of migration management to third countries, including to those where grave allegations have been raised concerning respect for fundamental rights. The first such agreement was with Turkey in 2016. This concerned the return of irregular migrants from Greece and the prevention of the creation of new migration routes. 3 non-governmental organizations expressed serious concerns to my office that the Commission had not carried out a prior human rights assessment. One organization emphasized the dangerous situation of migrant women and children in particular. I reminded the Commission that the political nature of the agreement did not remove its fundamental rights obligations. I asked it to monitor ongoing human rights risks and to take measures to reduce them. Yet just last week, a report that some of you may have read from a consortium of journalists across Europe, Lighthouse Reports, revealed truly shocking accounts of forced deportations of migrants from Turkey to Syria. Deportations that appear to have been to some degree enabled by EU money intended to protect migrants in detention centres. The agreement with Turkey was thought to be a single urgent measure in response to an extraordinary wave of migration driven by the ongoing Syrian civil war and the rapid expansion of the so-called Islamic State. Yet as more recent agreements with Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, and Mauritania suggest, it was in effect a pilot project. Last year, the EU signed a memorandum of understanding with Tunisia without conducting an explicit human rights impact assessment. Although from an investigation which will shortly be published by my office, it appears that the human rights challenges were well known. The MOU was signed against a backdrop of numerous media and civil society reports of migrant abuse, including beatings, torture, arbitrary arrests, collective expulsions, forced evictions, and theft. So how should the EU balance its fundamental rights obligations with the political imperatives of the now compelling increasing numbers of governments to use harsher means to stop the flow of migrants? Yet we perhaps need to step back and ask not how we'll be judged at the next election, but rather how history will judge us. Will our grandchildren consider our actions reasonable, given the contemporary political pressures of the time? Or will they instead, when judged through a longer lens, damn us? I would briefly like to mention the EU's very welcome ratification of the Istanbul Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which requires parties to ensure that women who are victims of violence are not returned to any country where their life would be put at risk or be subjected to inhumane or degrading treatment. The EU's Court of Justice has also ruled that the common European asylum system must be interpreted in line with the Convention, meaning that women may now be regarded as a social group that qualifies for protection. The recently adopted EU directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence also calls for targeted support for victims with intersectional needs, such as migrant women, and explicitly requires member states to create separate facilities for women who have applied for international protection or who are subject to return procedures. So we shall see how these changes, positive as they are, will be implemented in practice. And it is critical that oversight institutions at national and EU level continue to monitor the protection of migrant women's rights. This will help to give life to the fundamental values that ultimately shape who we are as Europeans. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much again for coming. I invite you maybe to switch chairs with Emma Rafovic, who is going to come and intervene. And we are going to listen to all of our speakers. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A session. So I will invite everyone to come back to the tables, and we will have questions from the audience. So thank you, Emma Rafovic, for being with us. You are a newly elected MEP, as I was saying, who is sitting also in the FAM committee. And the reason why we wanted to have MEPs with us today is, of course, due to the extremely important role of the European Parliament in the decision-making process in the EU. The European Parliament, as you know very well, is the only EU institutions where the representatives are directly elected by EU citizens. So it's an important democratic space where there is also an important role of civil society. And the FAM committee specifically discusses issues that relate to the protection of migrant women, such as issues related to care, to women's poverty, the anti-trafficking directive that was revised last year, where there was debate about the introduction of surrogacy among the causes of trafficking, for instance. Now there is also discussions about the Victims' Rights Directive, which has mostly neutral perspective, so-called neutral perspective, which is actually usually a woman's blind perspective that doesn't take into consideration the specific needs of women. And this is a stand that we have taken through our project FULFIL, as it was developed to you earlier with our women's rights perspective on the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. This is something that we are trying to push in our interaction with the Parliament as well. So do you have any comments on any or some or all of these, or even anything else that you think is relevant to bring to the table? Thank you so much again for your participation.
Thank you for your invitation. Maybe to introduce myself a bit. My name is Emma Rafovic. I am a newly elected, as you just said, member of Parliament of the European Parliament. I am from France, and I'm a member of the S&D group in the European Parliament. And maybe I wanted also to say in front of all of you that I am a feminist. And it is also to push all those fights that I know we have in common, that I am right now in the European Parliament, obviously a member of the FAM committee, as you just said, but also in the LIBE committee, which cares about migration, freedom, fundamental rights, and also in the CULT committee, which cares about education and culture. It is really a pleasure for me to be with you today and to get to know all of you and all of your fights, and also an honor, obviously, to talk after you. And I want you to know that you are truly an example. And you were talking in the beginning of your intervention how important it is to have women who speaks out and who speaks loudly. And to be honest, you are one of those, and we all know you for that, and really thank you for your work. I maybe want to begin this intervention by saying that when we talk about migration, we need to fully understand how women in migrations are sometimes ignored and sometimes invisible. And so I wanted to bring you some numbers, obviously numbers that maybe you already know, but when we speak about 281 million international migrants in 2024, we also have to know that in this 281 million people, there were 135 million women in those migrations. And sometimes we forget that in these migration paths, these are women who have lives and obviously specificity and discrimination, and we need to address them particularly. It is almost half. Half of migrations are women migrants. And all migrations combined, there are more women than men in the international migrants that go in European destinations, such, for example, as France, my country. But it is also the case for Spain, Italy, or even countries outside of Europe, such as the United States or India. But when we say that today we see more men migrants than women, is because maybe sometimes we only look at why people are moving away. And when and where there is more men, it's when migrants are fleeing for economical issues. Women, when they are fleeing, are of course fleeing also about economical issues, but not just about that. It is also people who are fleeing discriminations. And as you just said, sometimes migration and discrimination is happening at the beginning of a path. It's happening during the path of migration, and it's also happening at the arrival moment, as you just said about Ukrainian women. So today we have to, obviously, in the European Parliament, talk about the specificity of feminization of migration. There is undoubtedly a feminization of migration that we need to take into account in order to establish a policy that is more in line with the reality of migration. In this sense, the 2024 Global Migration Report describes this phenomenon well. If the issue of migration remains structured by gender norms that assign to each person certain roles and expectations according to his or her gender, as a result, migration tended to be described as a male-dominated phenomenon, while women and girls were considered tide movers who followed or later joined their migrant husbands or fathers. But it is actually not only the case. When researchers took a closer look at migration and gender roles when feminist theories or gender social construction were formulated in the late 80s or 90s, we see that more and more women are migrating independently, which is sometimes something that is outside of our fantasies on what we expect about migration, including as workers and including as people who are fleeing discrimination. So why do we speak about today? Obviously, you are feminist organizations and feminist activists, but why do we need to have a specific look at women in migration? And when we look at it, we know that there are increased risks for women today. It is more visible and clear that economic reasons are no more the only reasons of movements toward the European Union. It is also the fact that there is also today specific gender-based violence in the world. Women and children are particularly exposed to an increased set of risk of violence throughout the journey from the country of departure to the country of arrival. You talked before about Afghanistan and the words of Meryl Streep. Obviously, the Taliban regime right now is somehow creating an apartheid, a gender apartheid for women. And it creates a life risk for women in this country. And so, of course, a lot of them are trying to flee for their life and for their rights. It has been confirmed, actually, by the Court of Justice of the European Union that Afghan women could apply for asylum in the European Union on the basis of, obviously, nationality, but also gender. This is also the case when crossing by boat. Obviously, a lot of women, and you are speaking about how women die in the path of migration. Today, we know that when there is boats to cross the Mediterranean Sea, for example, women and children are often in the center of the boat. What's happening is that when water or weather is actually destroying the boat, women are where the ship sinks, and so they are the one who die. And it is something that obviously is really terrifying and horrific to us. But even in this moment, we know where the women sit. And where the women sit is where there is obviously an increased risks of death. Today, we need to say that in the European Parliament, there is insufficient commitment to the rights of women migrants. The adoption under the last mandate of the Asylum and Migration Pact and all the texts that make it remain anchored in a logic of border control, leaving, honestly, gender issues in the background. Having an approach to flow management only, rather than the protection of human rights, make gender mainstreaming in Europe migration policies even more complex. Because even, when you are only worried about how many people are going to come in Europe, wanting, of course, that there is less and less people coming to Europe. Well, you don't really care if in those people there are women who are risking their lives. And I want to maybe explain to you or present to you a little anecdote that I came across when I was just a few weeks ago in the Libe committee. I am, as I said, a member of both Libe and FAM committee. And when it was explained to us, to the European Commission, to the Libe committees, that we were going to work with the FAM committee, some people from the far right, Fabrice Leggeri, not to quote him, so former Frontex director, said that the FAM committee would parasite the Libe work. And I want you to know that we are not going to parasite the Libe work, but we are obviously going to parasite whatever Mr. Leggeri wants us to do. And it is really important to say that we are in a fight against far right, against sexist and men, and also against patriarchy, of course. And we know that very well. But if we don't assume, and if we don't say really clearly in the Libe committee that we want dignity for all, that we want Europe to welcome people, to welcome refugees, to take care about asylum, if we don't say those words clearly, then honestly, whatever we say about women will have no voice. And maybe this is my main message to you, is that if we want to have a particular attention to the specificity of the migration of women, we need also to have, and to dare maybe, and we know it's hard right now, but to dare to have a humanist point of view about migration and asylum. So obviously, right now, maybe you are not familiar with the rhythm of our works in the European Parliament, but right now in the Libe committee, in the FAM committee, in every committee, our work is not really rounded around texts or legislation. Right now, we are waiting. For what are we waiting? We are waiting because starting 4th of November, we will have hearings. Hearing of the College of Commissioners. Ursula von der Leyen, the president, has decided to present to us a number of people who are going to, be the ruler of the Commission and to direct the Commission and its works. We have several problems. Not only one, but several, actually. And I will try to maybe present to you a few of them, just so you know. The first problem, I guess, is obviously the place of the far right in the Commission. Ursula von der Leyen has decided to appoint as executive vice president a member of the ECR group, which is the far right, named by Giorgia Meloni. And for us, it is obviously something that is not okay and a red line, if I may say. The second problem that we have is the place of gender equality, the place of equality as itself. It was one of our main concerns that equality between women and women, between people, the fight against discrimination may have a really important role in the Commission. However, the proposal that we had is to name a commissioner, well, crisis management, crisis, and equality. So as you see, it's quite invisible. And so it's going to be for us a really big fight. And I maybe want to end with these few words because we need you, to be honest. We need you to be loud with us. Because when today you look at the European Parliament, and from my place, I see a lot of people. We don't have only allies in the Parliament. And so we need you to fight with us. We need you to say with us to Ursula von der Leyen that equality needs to be a priority. We need you to say with us that dignity of migration, that dignity of women all over the world is a priority. And I say that as a feminist, of course, but you know that it's not only one voice. We need million voices. We need thousands of voices. And so for that, I need you, and I can't wait, obviously, to work with all of you in the mandate that's coming. As you see, we have a lot of fights to fight, but I know that we will win them all, because obviously we are together as feminists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation. So we are now going to listen to Ingrid Belanda Todino, who is head of unit of the Fundamental Rights Policy, DG Justice of the European Commission. And I think we had also a nice transition with MEP Rafovic's speech, which highlighted also the role of the Commission, both in its composition and obviously in its work. Maybe you will also address the role, obviously, of your DG and the articulation with other DGs that may be relevant to this topic of migration, such as DG Home, for instance, and the work, of course, that the European Commission is carrying in this context, maybe with also an overview of the new Migration and Asylum Pact, if you want to touch upon that. But I will give you the floor now, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alisa. I would like to thank Ombudswoman O'Reilly to set the scene. I think you did that in a really, really good way. It's important to keep the EU institutions, the Commission, the European Parliament and the Council accountable, and all the agencies involved. These are complex problems, to say the least. There are many policies in place, a lot of legislation in place that need to be implemented. I will only be able to really speak about what we are doing in DG Justice. I represent the civil service with more than 20 years in the European Commission, having done, which fits really well with this discussion. I've been working on victims' rights. I have been working on gender equality, and now I'm head of the Fundamental Rights Policy Unit in DG Justice. What I have not any experience or expertise on is migration and asylum policies in the European Commission. But I of course, we monitor that work closely from the fundamental rights angle. I just wanted to add, just before starting my little intervention, is also in this discussion, I think it's really important to remember that the member states and their governments and the role they have in all of this. It's very easy to point at the European Commission, at the Parliament, but the Council and the member states are really, I think the Ombudswoman said very clearly, the political landscape of these issues are such as driving the direction forward, and you as stakeholders, the civil society, need to hold your governments accountable as well. I can assure you from the European Commission, there are a number of very dedicated civil servants who try to make a change. I've mentioned already the policies I myself have worked on. And the path forward is advancing. It's filled with hurdles. It's not easy to try to push evidence of fundamental rights violations forwards and upwards in to end up in decisions by the Commission, but I can assure you that we are really working hard on doing that. One thing that we are doing is to develop policies that are promoting and protecting the EU values. You know, fundamental rights that are set out in the Charter of Fundamental Rights are foundation values of the EU, together with the rule of law, democracy, equality, and so on. And I wanted to focus my comments here today on this, exactly that, the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights having this intersection of value-based policies that are so important. The project that we have heard this morning really is a good illustration of where we are trying to support practitioners and civil society in this area. The strategic litigation to ensure that migrant women have access to justice is really a priority that we have. That's why the project is funded under the SERVE program that my team selected. So I'm really happy that I can be here today, hearing from this morning some experiences, and thank you also from the testimonies of migrant women themselves. That's really important, because courts play a crucial role in this by applying and interpreting provisions of EU law and national law, applying them to individual cases. So strategic litigation is a powerful tool. We have to ensure that fundamental rights are upheld, especially when dealing with fundamental rights violations. It's not only about resolving individual cases, but also about driving systemic change and ensure a coherent implementation of EU law across member states. That's why this is so important, that those practitioners, those lawyers, and those NGOs that can help victims of violation drive strategic cases forward to the national courts and to the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. We have seen some key cases. We heard about the case recent where migrant women were defined as a specific social group that would qualify for refugee status. That's a key case bringing this area forward. So the FULFIL project has really helped advancing this knowledge base and the resources to be able to build capacity and also to provide training for legal professionals in strategic litigation. And we're really thrilled to see the database as well that was presented, because I think you're very right, and I love the name, the Women's Rights Database. I think that is perfect. That is exactly what it's about, to gather, and thank you for that huge job, because we all know that data and statistics are not broken down by gender, and having colleagues having gone through all these databases in different fora and developed this women's rights database, I think that is extremely important, and I'm sure that we will be able to use it as well in my service. I think this is part of having this comprehensive overview of the rights of migrant women, and encourage and support those who can represent them. I think that is key, and we will continue having this priority in the SERVE program, which is the Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values program, in the few years to come before we have a new financial framework. Now, moving over to what the Commission is doing to support migrant women's rights. As I said, the key foundation is, of course, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. It applies to all the EU institutions and to member states when they are implementing EU law. In this area, there is obvious a competence. EU law is already in place. Member states need to respect and apply the Charter when they are applying the migration law. So this is, of course, something that we need to make sure. We are monitoring that. We are trying to work with our colleagues in DG Home and other services to really discuss when we have evidence of violations. And thank you very much for your work on that as well. That has highlighted many cases where we have serious problems and concerns. I hope also that in the next Commission, and we heard also that we are now waiting to the appointment of the new Commission, the College of the Commission, and that the priorities on these areas will remain. But I think we have already come quite a long way in the gender equality area. Combating violence against women has been a key priority in the current mandate. We have acceded finally to the Istanbul Convention, and we have also adopted the directive on combating violence against women. So those are extremely important steps forward and need to now be implemented. The same goes with the Asylum Pact. I will unfortunately not be able to tell you more about the details, but the implementation plan was adopted this summer. There's a building block number 9 on safeguards and rights that are setting out those fundamental rights safeguards that need to be respected when the pact will be implemented. And I will make sure that we are closely following that work as well. So to conclude, I mentioned funding. Also for those of you in the room who are interested to develop further projects, there will be more funding under the Asylum Migration Integration Fund and also the SERVE program. As I said, we continue funding projects on fundamental rights. Strategic litigation is one of the priorities, but also on combating violence against women, with specific focus also of particularly vulnerable women, such as migrant women. So just to conclude, this is a work that, at least in our service, is a priority. We are working across the different teams on intersecting issues. So I can only assure you that, at least in the civil service in the European Commission, we are dedicated to this. And we hope that this will now be confirmed very quickly in the next work program of the Commission, so we can know how we move forward in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. We're going, do you mind staying here? Oh no, maybe it's going to be a bit long. Yeah? We're sorry because we are way more than we thought. So there is a little bit of issues with the chair, but I think we're fine. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think the floor is comfortable as well, hopefully. Okay, so we have MEP Lina Galvez who joined us. Thank you so much for coming, because we know you had a very busy schedule today. She's the chair of FAM committee, and so she will also bring her view about the issues we are discussing today related to promoting the rights of migrant women and the specific work of the FAM committee on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for not being able to be, hello, some of my colleagues, to be here in advance, but it's, we are preparing these hearings for the new commission, so it's quite a busy moment. And in addition, we get lost in because we remember there was a way to come internally, and at the end we didn't manage. We have discovered very nice places within Parliament. We didn't know there were inside the buildings, but never mind. Always, every day, we can learn something different. So I just wanted to share with you what has been the work and what are we doing in the FAM committee. You have to know that the FAM committee is trying not only to make an impact on direct regulation on women's rights and gender equality, but also to include transversally in a mainstreaming way also in other committees, because sometimes there are legislation that could impact very much on women's rights and gender equality in other committees. And this is a very difficult task to do because it's not always clear for our colleagues and other committees how important and how differentiated are the impact of each one of the legislation we are dealing with, of each one of the policies we are promoting, because normally if you are in a different position, you participate differently in the processes, impact is very different. I would like you to know as well that we have followed very much the intersectional approach, very much in each one of any single piece of legislation we have been really dealing with and promoting, at least in FAN committee. Intersectionality has been really very present, and obviously migrant women has always been very clear. Then I will mention some specific reports and legislation regarding that. And that has been the case until now. And I hope that will be the case in the near future, but I'm not completely sure, unfortunately, because there are already arithmetic within this parliament has changed. And if we will not realize very much in certain topics, we will realize too much in other topics. And probably this is one of the main cultural war battle that will take place during this mandate, unfortunately. And in the first committees, there are already people questioning what is intersectionality, or what means women in all their diversity, what that means. So, and this is something we have now, unfortunately, and I just wanted to share with you, but we will fight very much for that. And obviously, I think Juan Fernando López Aguilar, that was the chair of LIBE, I have sent a video. So I think you have already, I don't know if, anyway, so this probably regarding the Migration and Asylum Pact, he will be the one to speak. He was the rapporteur of it, so I will not mention that much. What I will mention is that we really try hard to include the specificities of the violence or the vulnerabilities or that many migrant women really suffer in their in those processes, and how they should be sometimes in the first line really to demand asylum and refugee status. But on the other hand, we have there are some reports that probably you are aware of, that there are some violations, some that are happening in those processes that are disincentivizing women to really to get to this moment of asking for asylum and refugee, because they are suffering even by agencies that are collaborating with the European Union, rapes and other violations. If that is true, we really need to act. And we cannot at all accept such a thing, that we are working with agencies that are doing this. So probably you know more than so. And if you have material, you have evidences showing that this is happening with these agencies the European Union is working with. We will really appreciate to have all that information, because this is something we will really fight to end from the FUN committee. So this is, but I said will come Juan Fernando, that he is real specialist on this pact. But I would like just to share with you some work we have done from the FUN committee, that in which we have really treated the specificities, vulnerabilities, and how we could improve the opportunities and the dignity of women from a migrant origin. One file one report we adopted in last year, it was one on prostitution. Well, we know that there is, and also the directed on trafficking. Both are very much interconnected, unfortunately, and we also included how much sometimes many migrant women are forced in this trafficking, smuggling and trade to end up on prostitution. So it was a very dispute report, but we managed really to have a finally common opinion, very much linked to the Nordic model, sort of prevention, and focusing on demand side and not on the supply side, and also especially looking for exit possibilities and opportunities for women that are in those situations. So that is something we really look at for. And also another initiative report that in which we included again very much migrant women was in the poverty report. It was we did a report on women's poverty in Europe, and again there is a very important percentage of women from migrant origin, because of less opportunities, because of discrimination, because of bigger vulnerabilities, some of them after have passed by this trafficking and smuggling, that are suffering poverty, especially for discrimination and lack of opportunities. So in this report, we include again this view in a very specific way. Then, well, I mentioned already the trafficking directive, and probably another piece of legislation that I should mention is the care strategy. And the care strategy was is not a legislation, but it was a whole strategy that was very much focused on long-term care after what happened with COVID. And there we know that there is a lot of labor and a lot of work that is done also by women of migrant origin, many times without any control and exploitation. So we managed to include also in this care strategy in Europe, we managed to include something that I think it is very important, that is not only the goal is not only the dignity of the people receiving care, but we include something that was not in the original proposal, that was also the dignity of the people that are providing that care. So this is something that we need to develop, and we need to build up on during this mandate, which I think it is very important because it's very much linked with the work opportunities. And if we are really able to make that work opportunities based on dignity and good working conditions, and not on Black economy and everything, that it will be very important, and that will bring really a lot of possibilities of inclusion of jobs and opportunities. So I think this is something it was just designed in the previous mandate, and we have now to build on now. And well, let's see. We are still waiting to know the work program from the Commission. You know, it's the Commission that have the this initiative. We don't have. We can do this report that I have mentioned. And as soon as I can, we will keep fighting for this intersectional approach. And but as I say, it will not be evident as it was in the previous, evident to have the majorities to continue with this approach. I hope we will manage to have it. And another thing, and I just finished with that, that probably you really need to know as well. Well, you know much better than me for sure that there is now a xenophobic, racist, populist moment in Europe. Not only in Europe, but well, we are now in Europe, and an anti-gender, anti-feminist moment also all over the world. And it is a core part of all the anti-democratic movements all over the world. And they are also in Europe. And up to that moment during the last term, these anti-democratic, anti-European and anti-gender groups were not very active regarding women's rights and gender equality. There was just appearance sometimes, but not really very, very active. Now they are. Now they have discovered could be a central part of their populist success, and so they are. And how they are approaching this subject is mainly through what they call freedom, regarding freedom, especially not to abort. They are really very much against sexual and reproductive health rights. This is their sort of first target. And secondly, or first or second, I don't know, just identifying violence against women with migration. This is now in every single discussion in the plenaries and in whatever meeting we are dealing with. They are making this identification one day after another, one day after another. So sometimes their arguments is the way we have to protect European, well, I don't know what they mean by European, but never mind, it's probably not what I mean by European woman, but also migrant woman from their own men. So that is growing and growing and growing and growing. And this is something that we really need to have in mind in order really to be able to defend women's rights, to defend also with intersectionality and all the different axes of inequality. And many women are suffering, especially women from migrant origin, but without really helping them to make their hate speech and their racist and horrible, really, speech they are doing. Just wanted to share with you how they are instrumentalizing and using women's right and equality, because gender is something that they, for them, is something called like gender ideology, and in order to reinforce the racist and hate speeches. So it is not very, but I hope really it's good to know what we have in front of us, in order we can be very strategic and to work in order to maintain what we have always done in the FAN committee and in this parliament, that is to fight for women's rights and in all their diversity, and having in mind different axes of inequalities in this intersectional way. So I hope I will not be very negative, but the moment has changed and we have to be aware of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lina. What we are going to do is to listen to Zoe, the representative from UNODC, because she also has to leave soon. I don't know if you have time to stay a little bit further for Q&A. If you don't have time, maybe we take just one question for you before you leave. And I know Emma Rafovic also has to leave. So I don't know if you have time about just one question, if there is one, or otherwise you can also go. I'm not... don't want you to be late because of us. Okay, so we just take one question for each before they leave, and then we will listen to Zoe, who is online. So we have one question on the back. Do we have one question for a woman first, and then I will give you the floor.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for this panel. It was really interesting. Yeah, I wanted to make a specific question for the FEM committee members. So I'm Alessia. I work with UTSOPI, which is an organization which fights for the rights of the sex workers in Belgium. And as we may know, like with a few exceptions, sex workers' human rights are like grossly violated worldwide. And we think as an organization that like limited rights create less choice. So we think that it is imperative that sex work is recognized as work, not because it's a work like everyone else, but because sex workers deserve legal protection while working. And as you may know, on the 3rd of May 2024, the Belgian Parliament has approved the labor law for sex workers under contract. And thanks to this law, the sex workers will also be able to work under an employment contract, who's gaining access to social security, such as pension, unemployment, health insurance. And yeah, at the same time, the law ensures that sex workers in the workplace are protected against job-related risk and conditions are imposed. Yeah, so I just wanted to know, like I just wanted to know which is the position of the FEM committee and if you're addressing the issues somehow, what are you doing? And yeah, I was curious about that. Sorry if I took too much space. I just wanted to...
So we take the second question, and sorry, you will keep your question for later just because they have to go, yeah?
Hi. Well, my question is actually for all speakers. I heard a lot of issues today. For example, the woman in Trillium that died on the boat, a woman in French that had her uterus removed, women from Ukraine that also went, for example, to England, and were harassed in some way. So I wanted to know what is being doing to prevent right now, and if in case that happens, what can be done to make it right? Thank you.
Thank you. So a very wise question. So okay, that's perfect. Okay.
Because I was here in the previous term when we passed a report on prostitution, and the majority, there was, very well, everyone, we know very well that this is a very divisive topic on the feminist movement. There are part of the feminist movement that are for sex work. I mean, to consider is work as any other work. And there are other part of the feminist movement in which include myself. We are abolitionists. And this is divisive. It has always been. It's not new. And we have this report in this parliament. And the position that was majority in the FAM committee and in the parliament was more sort of Nordic model. And we have a lot of hearings. We have a lot of information. We really have meetings with many people, different everywhere, and we have a lot of numbers showing that in countries in which this kind of Nordic model, in addition to very good exit policies inclusive policy, the demand of prostitution was reduced while it was increased in countries with more sort of regulation towards sex work. So that is what we have, and the official position of Parliament, it was a non-initiative report. So it's not a law, it's not a directive, it is not a regulation. It's just a non-initiative report but shows the position of Parliament. It is sort of very different from the one you are proposing, and it is the other one as the one related to the Nordic model. You're right that if you have less opportunities, you have less freedom, but that's the issue. The issue is that there is not this kind of a real choice when your opportunities are very low. So what we did at the same time is to fight poverty, to fight for better opportunities to the market, to fight against discrimination, that people have more opportunities than the one, because sometimes in order you are really free to choose, you have a real freedom, you need material preconditions for that. So I cannot speak of any choice if there are not that material preconditions. You cannot speak of real choice if socialization is sexualizing women, are cosifying women, are commodifying women's body, and we cannot speak of real choices if we don't have real opportunities, because opportunities we change our choices depending on our real opportunities, and if our opportunities are only to get into prostitution, I cannot really speak about choice. So choice and freedom, as I say, is very much related to material preconditions and other preconditions. And so that is the position of Parliament. Probably next time we talk about, we could have a different position, because we will have different majorities. But so far, and it is quite recent, the position that was voted majority in the European Parliament, it is very similar to the Nordic model, having in mind prevention and attacking more demand and not supply. So not against women that are in prostitution, but against who could be asking for that. Obviously smuggling and trafficking, and also thinking especially on exit possibilities. Thank you.
Tough question. Maybe to answer, well, you asked a big question. So what can be done, basically? Because we are all aware of the violence that is today a reality for, honestly, the vast majority of women who go through migration. We had actually a study in France from an asylum center that said that 100% all women that actually arrived in the French territory after a migration path, they all had, at some point of the migration, had sexual or gender-based violence. So of course, it needs to say that for us in the FEM community, and obviously also in the LIBE committee, we need to take actions. We have one difficulty, which is major difficulty, is that in the European Union and as the European Parliament, we cannot do everything. We obviously can obligate states to do some things, but not everything, and every policy is not actually our responsibility. However, we had an initiative report from the called FEM LIBE committee, I guess, in the last mandate, that said that we needed to guarantee that women's rights were a priority of every policy making in the European Union. And it is something I believe that we should push even more. And maybe to bring to you a proposition that we made during the European campaign, and something that we also will push in the mandate to come, is that we wanted to say that today in Europe, actually, because obviously we are here feminists, but we are also, when I hear some of you maybe a bit pessimists, and we maybe need to be also optimistic and see what can be done and what has been done. in some of EU countries. And so we talked about one of Gisèle Halimi big fights, which was the clause of l'Européenne la plus favorisée, the most favored woman in Europe. And so what we said is that, and it's going to be one, I think, of our work is to say everything that can be done or that has been done in Europe, in the EU states for the women's rights, we are going to try to make it a reality for all women in the European Union. When we see what has been done, for example, in Spain for the fight against gender-based violence and the reforms that has been done in police or in the justice, in the jurisdictional system, it's something that all women in Europe deserve. And so it's going to be some of our fights, but also for that, for what can be done, it's going to be a pair, a couple, between where we are, us, in the European Parliament, and with also people in the state level, because it has to be both, actually.
Thank you so much, both of you. We will let you go now. Thank you for your support and always answering presents when we contact you. And we are looking forward to collaborate in this mandate as well. Thank you. Merci, à bientôt. And I will ask our two other speakers, the EU Ombudsman and the representative of Digital Justice, to come back to the floor to take some questions, if you would like. Unfortunately, the representative of UNODC has had to leave, so that's why I was trying to rush the time, but it's okay. We will have her next time. And so now I will take your questions. Maybe we take a few questions and then we give you the floor, yeah? So yeah, we have one here.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conference. My name is Stella Veliki. I have studied physics and informatics, and I'm a member of the European Physical Society. And I would like to say that I have a very good experience with the European Ombudsman Institution. And I have some complaints. I receive an answer. I receive a complaints number. I receive a person to contact if I have some problem. And I can tell you that I speak about Ombudsman institution. Yesterday, I was to a Balkan conference with Serbia and all the other Balkan states. And there are a lot of organizations, they have a lot of problems, and I speak right to the Ombudsman. I don't make compliments if it's not necessary, you know. So I tell you, it's really my opinion and my experience. And the people don't know your institution very well. I can tell you this, but I speak every time if somebody comes to me and say, look, I have this problem, I have this complaint, and I give you some information. That is what I want to say. I don't say every time from every European institution, but for Ombudsman institution, I have only good experience. So, my question is, what I don't see here is how do you teach the immigrant women their rights if they are coming here? I don't see very clear the process that you have. I know they are invisible. I know that it's difficult to contact them, but one time they must contact an organization, you know, a government organization. Then you must be an obligation to teach them their rights. They don't know their rights in the country where they are. You know, that is my question.
Thank you very much. So as I say, we will take a few questions, and maybe also I will provide some answers from the side of the European Network of Migrant Women and more civil society. So do we have any other question? And please, when you speak, speak into the mic, yeah, so that we can hear you properly. We had one question in the back earlier, but maybe that was for MEP specifically, yeah, okay. Anything else? Or you are tired and you are hungry, I think, yeah? or applicable to the other speakers? Okay. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for the presentations and the discussion. My question was more relating what the MEPs also touched upon, the current political climate, which is very anti-migrant, anti-women. So I wanted to see, when we're talking about visibility and about giving migrant women a voice, it's also important to have, not always, but have people who understand maybe their background and their role. So I don't know if you have specific projects or programs to amplify the voices of women nationally. Like, for instance, if you identify certain women which, you know, have like a political background, and then guiding them to also have an influence on the European level, because I think diversity, for instance, in certain institutions and in the parliament, you know, it's not really there. So I was wondering, because now we're focusing more on rights, is there a way that you have projects relating to prevention of how to increase the voice of women on the level of policy making? So
Thank you very much. So we do, and I will reply to you in more details later. So I would like maybe a couple questions for our speaker before they leave us.
Hello, thank you for all the panels and all that you shared today. It's a more of a general question, I guess, but do you have any advice for young women and young migrant women approaching the decision-making sector, especially in regards to the difficulties that women face because of gender inequality? Any advice? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One last question, maybe? Anyone? Yes?
Hi, I'm from the Australian delegation, so it's been a real treat to hear everyone this morning. Very inspiring work that you're doing here in Europe. My question is around the Istanbul Convention, because we don't, Australia is member of CEDAW, but it doesn't really drive reform. And my question to you is Istanbul open to non-member state signatories? And how much do you think that could potentially influence reform in non-EU member states?
Thank you very much. So I will give you the floor. I don't know who wants to go first. Oh, sorry, I didn't. There is a question. Oh, okay.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your compliment for the office. That means an awful lot to me, because one of the I would like to think, defining values that my colleagues bring to the office is communication. And I know very often we're the last chance for people to be heard. And I want people to be literally heard. And I think in an increasingly digitized and automated environment, it's very important that you can connect to a real person. And that even if we can't help you, ultimately you feel that you have been heard. Because I think we all experience it, even in normal services, trying to get through to a bank, trying to get through to your phone operator and press button this, that and the other, and you just feel so frustrated, and it adds to the stress. So thank you for that. I think your question about how access services, complaint handlers, all of that is a very important one. And something occurred to me when talking about trafficking and so on. And quite often I use the Eurostar. And when I go to the Eurostar station in London, as soon as you go in, you see, commendably, there are all these big signs, you know, are you a victim of trafficking? Are you concerned? Are you this? Are you that? But as far as I can see, it's just written in English. And the chances are you may not have English as a language. So language is a hugely important thing. And because we live in such an English-centric world, we've all been wonderfully speaking in possibly not your first language here. I think it is really important that when service providers take that into account and don't assume that people speak principal languages and that's it. I think the Ombudsman Network is also, and again, this is work, well, I'll be stepping down soon, but I may gently suggest to my successor that the Ombudsman Network does more work in relation to this, about making their work and their engagement with minority or other groups more directed and more accessible, and language has to be part of that. But I also think, and I know this has been commented on, the people who are there was a post, an article recently by Shada Islam. Some of you may know her, follow her as a journalist, and there was a picture of the European Parliament, and it was virtually all white. The diversity of Europe was not reflected in that. And that has to impact on how people understand and develop a sensitivity and a sensibility around these issues. And equally, if you look at many of the institutions, if you look at the European Court of Justice, I was having I won't say it was an argument, a discussion with somebody from the court in relation to cases involving, for example, the wearing of the hijab and all of that. And this person was explaining to me different judgments that have made, religious symbolism and all of that. And I was saying, well, for many people who wear the hijab, it's not just something you wear professionally and personally, it's something you wear all the time. And I said, do you have many Muslim judges on the court? And he said no. So that lack of diversity at the institutional level also feeds into that. You can answer the even more harder questions.
I think that the discussion we were having here is really putting the finger to the point. We can support, at the EU level, we support civil society projects that can reach to the grassroots. We can provide funding, we can adopt laws, but at the end, those are implemented at the national level. That is why it's so important. What we have not talked about a lot today is the priority also to support and protect and empower the civic space, and that's something that I will work on a lot now in the mandate that we're now starting soon. I can already say that because it's been written out in the President von der Leyen's political guidelines. The focus on empowering and enabling a thriving civic space is key to our democracies and the rule of law and the guaranteeing of people's fundamental rights being safeguarded. So that is something that will hopefully remain a very strong priority and also be increased. And the civic space, the civil society organizations, the NGOs are key to the work that we're doing, but also the human rights defenders, the equality bodies, the human rights institutes, the ombuds persons at the national level that can represent and support victims of violations. So those that kind of an ecosystem of fundamental rights actors at the national level, the local level, national level, local, regional, national, European level, all need to work together. So I hope that the Commission can help facilitating that work, and that's certainly something that I have on my radar for the years to come. Also, how do we let migrant women know what the rights are? That's all linked as well to communication, because we have so many tools that have been prepared. There are so many databases and leaflets and the brochures about the rights that you have, but how does that really become something concrete? I think that is really a big challenge that we have. We talk a lot, but where is the action? Where do actually the people get their rights real? So there again, that I was talking about before, we need to enforce those rights through litigation. It can be a very, very long, costly, difficult process, but we need to support that and build the capacity for the lawyers who work on these topics to be able to bring cases to the courts so we can make change. Because once the court has ruled, all the member states need to follow those rules. That is really important. And that also brings to your question the visibility, amplifying of the voices. How do you bring citizens closer to the EU level? We have important processes starting with citizens panels, for example. How do you bring the citizens into the democracy? So that is also something that I think we will focus on much more in the future. One thing that I haven't mentioned is the children and the young people. Unless they are in the mix, that it stops. We have to start the awareness raising, the empowerment from the very grassroots. And there in my team, we have a very, very interesting work that we're doing on the rights of the child. We have set up a children's participation platform that bring children at their national, local levels, bring them into the policy making and have a voice in what we're doing. And we have had already in 2 years a few processes where they have said what's important to them, most recently on protection and safety. So all of that is super important. And I think that is also what makes policy at the EU and national level real. Otherwise, it's just words, it's just paper. So all of that is important. On the Istanbul Convention, now I can't exactly remember to which they are open, but I don't think it's open to non-Council of Europe members. Remember that the Istanbul Convention is Council of Europe convention, which is 46 European states. So not all the EU member states have ratified the convention, but the EU has. So the EU as in itself is bound by the convention, which is a highly complicated matter, but it will hopefully bring some more accountability towards women. It will bring in an obligation to be monitored by the monitoring body of the Council of Europe, which is an important feature, and also aligning the rules that we have, hopefully already aligned with the Victims' Rights Directive on those. But whether Australia could join or not, I'm not sure. You need to check that. I don't think so. I think that's all the points. One thing I didn't mention, maybe to close, is victims' rights. That's super important as well. If you have been victim of a crime, there is a very comprehensive body of legislation at the EU level on victims' rights that are transposed and applied by member states. So don't forget that.
Thank you so much for both of you for being with us, really. And I will say a few words also to address some of the questions that were asked for the European Network of Migrant Women. So there was something also related to access to information, which was addressed by the EU Ombudswoman, but I think also it relates to the work of civil society organizations and women's rights organizations, because everything that we do we have in mind this accessibility concern for our target group. As a network, we are a platform of organization across Europe, as I said, and we do capacity building for member organizations and awareness raising, advocacy, and projects that don't always have migrant women as direct beneficiaries. However, our members, they work with migrant women directly. And so we provide support for them and tools for them translated in many languages. As you said, this is a very big issue to have very simple, short materials. So if we take an example, when the war in Ukraine began, and there was this influx of Ukrainian women and children fleeing the country, and of course, this led to increased vulnerability to trafficking, especially for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And this was very well documented by Europol, for instance. We published a very short, easy to read document highlighting red flags and signals that you should be worried about because maybe it will lead to trafficking. And we translated this in 6-7 languages to disseminate it. We also use digital tools. We try to make all of the information accessible to the women, because as you very well said, the first step of accessing justice is this access to information. So this is also part of our advocacy when we talk, for instance, about the Migration and Asylum Pact and this accelerated procedure that will happen in the border. How will information be provided concretely? Will there be interpreters? Will there be also female officers to work with the migrant women claims, etc.? So all of this, providing information, but also in an accessible way, in the language of the person, and in a way that they can understand and they can feel comfortable asking questions, etc. All of this is, of course, part of our reflection, our analysis, and our work. So that was on access to information. Then there was a question about basically access to decision making, more migrant women, more diversity in the decision making spheres, and especially at EU level. So political participation is also something that we work on because for us we understand it as maybe the highest degree of so-called integration into a host society. When we speak about integration, we usually think about labor market integration or access to service providers, etc., which is of course instrumental. However, once you have started to be truly able to exercise your civic participation, which we understand in a wide sense, so you're not just standing for elections or voting, because many migrant women don't have these rights in different countries. In some countries, migrants, even TC and third country nationals can vote for local elections, but it's far from all the European countries. But we understand political participation as also this access to information, engaging in civil society, engaging in debate, convincing others, campaigning, expressing your voice, doing advocacy. There is many, many ways to be civically involved. But for this, you need to have some capacity. And so we organize capacity building training program and projects. We have worked specifically on young migrant women political participation. We have produced a report highlighting what are the barriers impeding young migrant women specifically to exercise their rights to political participation. We have also produced a toolkit with activities and exercises that can build confidence, build knowledge, build skills in debating, in public speaking, and so on. And just in the context of the recent European Parliament elections, we conducted a 2 years EU-wide project in 14 countries, where we had a group of about 60 migrant women with very different ages, backgrounds, origins, legal status. It was a very diverse group. And through these 2 years, we worked with them on a comprehensive program where we had online sessions first to introduce them to EU processes. EU processes are little bit complicated, especially for people who don't know them at all. So we even train other CSOs and other women's rights organizations on advocacy at EU level, because you need to understand all of the decision-making process, when and where to intervene, who to talk to, etc. So we do this training with migrant women directly, and also with women's rights organizations and migrant women's rights organizations. And actually we received a grant from the European Commission DG Justice recently that will allow us to build the capacity of migrant women organizations across Europe through also sub-granting and other techniques. But for the agency project, we had online sessions. We had also in-person boot camps where we really worked with the women to practice. And then for 6 months, we supported, thank you so much, thank you. We supported them in creating their own campaign. It's based on the photo voice technique. We use the photo for storytelling and for promoting messages, because also it goes beyond language barriers. And so each of them was able to pick a topic, build a story with a political message in the context of the European elections. And then we supported the dissemination, the promotion. We organized events across, again, 14 EU member states. We organized also a big event here in the European Parliament where 30 migrant women came. We visited the Libe committee to bring them closer also to the institutions, etc. So this is for us a very important topic. CEDAW, the CEDAW committee is working on this. They will publish this month a general recommendation 40 on the inclusion of women in policy making. It's not specific to migrant women, but we submitted recommendations on migrant women specifically. And so, yeah, that's an important topic for us, and we are happy to discuss it also at the end of the event. So just before we finish and we let you go to eat, we had a few words from Juan Lopez Aguilar, who is a member of the Libe committee. And for us, it was important also to have just a little bit from the perspective of the Libe Committee, because as it was highlighted by other speakers, the Libe Committee is in charge of migration issues, and they worked a lot on the Asylum and Migration Pact. So we will listen to this short video, and we thank you very much for your participation, for your presence, and we are available for more questions after the event as we wrap up. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, thank you for inviting me to be part of this event and to have the opportunity to speak on important matters of our shared concern. Of course, I acknowledge the important work that the European Network of Migrant Women has done and does, advocating for the rights of migrant women across the European Union. Your work is critical, of critical importance, essential in bringing attention to the unique challenge faced by migrant women and girls. But today, I'm here to talk about how we in the European Parliament, I'm speaking to you from the seat of the European Parliament in Brussels. We are all members of the European Parliament committed to ensuring that these fundamental rights are fully respected and promoted, particularly in light of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which is a pact consisting of nothing less than 9 regulations in all, which are binding laws for the member states with obligations and rights which can be protected by the judicial system. Its implementation is essential, and it must be closely monitored by the member states and by the European Commission, particularly when it comes to vulnerable people and migrant women. Surely you know that the work of the Committee of Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, which I have chaired for 10 years, was instrumental in concluding the adoption of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. Throughout the stressful negotiations, which have been really, really hard, my group, the Social Democratic Group, and I myself, we have fought real hard to make sure that the pact contains necessary safeguards for the protection of fundamental rights of people concerned at all times, including in times of crisis. Of course, particular attention shall be paid to vulnerable people as minors, victims of human trafficking, and women, for sure. Women too. Pregnant women, victims of trafficking in human beings, persons who have been victims of torture, rape, other serious forms of violence, crimes, must be entitled to special reception needs in line with the Reception Conditions Directive and to special procedural guarantees in line with the Asylum Procedure Regulation, which are all elements, component elements of the new Migration and Asylum Pact. And likewise, member states shall provide appropriate monitoring of their situation, of the fundamental rights involved. And by the same token, as a rapporteur for the Crisis Regulation, which is also an essential component element of the Migration and Asylum Pact, particularly in light of the solidarity obligations by member states, I made everything in my hand to make sure that vulnerable people I have referred to are given primary consideration in the relocation programs, which are to be coordinated by the EU relocation coordinator in situations of crisis, that is, the situations of massive influx of migrants setting foot on European shores. So I believe strongly that the rights of migrant women must be at the center of our work on migration. Migrant women face special challenges, particularly hard, whether it's exposure to gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, and discrimination. So it's our duty to address these specific vulnerabilities and to provide targeted responses that ensure proper, adequate, standing protection. That is why member states must ensure that women in asylum processes have access to healthcare, legal support, protection from gender-based violence. that we pay special attention to the needs of victims of trafficking and sexual violence, that they receive services and the care they deserve. Member states must be held accountable for offering essential services like psychological support, language training tailored specifically to the needs of migrant women. In all, as a member of the European Parliament, I see our institution, which is a lawmaking institution, playing a key role in ensuring also oversight of the new Migration and Asylum Pact implementation. So it's our responsibility to make sure that both the European Commission, as guardian of the treaties and EU law, and member states are implementing their obligations under the new Migration and Asylum Pact, uphold the principles of human dignity and fundamental rights in their pact's implementation. Within Parliament, the Committee on Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, LIBE we call it, will remain actively involved, which is central to this task. Our committee will closely monitor how member states put the new migration policies into practice. Specifically, we will hold hearings and follow national developments to make sure that all actions taken under the pact are in line with European values and law, particularly regarding the treatment of vulnerable people, groups, women, and children. That is why we rest assured that we will continue working, and you may also trust the European Parliament remains a voice, a strong voice, pushing forward gender-sensitive policies in migration and asylum processes. Thank you for giving me the chance to address you from the seat of the European Parliament in Brussels, and I wish you the very best.